Om Tyagishwaram Ramakrishnam Sharadam Matrirupinim Vivekanandamacharyam Natva Bhakshami Shraddhaya. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. In our last classes, we discussed about this Urdhva Mula, this tree of samsara, tree of creation. Just like any tree has its roots, this creation itself that is perceptible to us, and also other lokas which we know from the scriptures, it also has its mula. Generally, mula is translated as root, roots, root. Here, the word mula means its source, the cause of its origin. This whole creation must have a cause of its origin. It must also have a cause of its maintenance. And in this particular case, the mula also means its swarupa. So it's Srishti Karana, Sthiti Karana, and its swarupa. That is the mula of this whole creation. And that mula is nothing but God or self, Atman, Brahman, God, whatever, Ishvara, whatever we call it. That is the mula of this creation. And then we refer to a Gita shloka wherein Ashwatthamenam Savirudu Moolam Asanga Shastrena Dridena Chitva. This samsara vriksha has to be felled, has to be cut asunder. Cutting this samsara vriksha doesn't mean destroying creation. It means bringing to an end our involvement in it. This samsara chakra that we are stuck in, being born again and dying and again, and this goes on, putting an end to it. That is what is meant by cutting or felling this Ashwattha Vriksha of creation, this Samsara Vriksha. To fell a tree, we need an axe or some such instrument. But to fell this Samsara Vriksha, what instrument, what weapon? And Gita says, Asanga Shastra, non-attachment. That is the Shastra, weapon, through which this samsara vriksha can be felt. Non-attachment is just a word, but in practice, what does it mean? See, when we see the world and if we accept it or if we accord it absolute reality, whatever we see, we accord absolute reality to it. We accept it to be true at its face value. Then it evokes kleshas, attachment, hatred, fear in us. This world, when we accord it absolute reality, it generates these emotions in us, these drives in us. These drives, so to say, color all our actions. And our actions become impelled by these drives. As a result, we accumulate good and bad results, karmas, and this samsara continues. So this is how the samsara continues. We accord this world absolute reality. It leads to kleshas. Kleshas leads to karma and then karma phala, and asanga means seeing the world for what it really is, not what it appears. Seeing the world in its true nature, which is nothing but God. So when we practice to have that bhava, that attitude, that perception of the world as God or as related to God. Related to God is also fine. The world and its beings belong to God, fine. Or it is God. Then it doesn't evoke any hatred, attachment and all that. On the contrary, it evokes reverence. When world is viewed and seen as God, it evokes reverence in us. And that reverence impels all our actions and turns them into worship. So our actions taken with this thought of reverence towards the world, its objects, its people, those actions turn into worship. And that leads to liberation. That is what is meant by felling this samsara vriksha. Felling this samsara vriksha means getting out of this samsara. And that is not to be done by getting away or running away, but knowing this samsara for what it actually is, not what it appears as. And then we get a sense of reverence towards it. All our actions turn into an act of worship that leads to liberation. This is how this asangatva can be practiced. And along with that, whatever is happening, understanding it as coming from God, as God's will. That is also a part of this asangatva. Treating world as God and accepting what is happening as coming from God. These two are, so to say, two sides of this asangatva. It is difficult to practice, as I said. All spiritual practice is difficult. But anyway, so if we practice it, then slowly we are able, it's a practice, so it takes time. But this is the Asanga Shastra, through which our involvement in this samsara can be cut asunder. Asangatva doesn't mean becoming disconnected or stone-hearted. It means seeing world for what it really is. So that was about the Ashwatha Vriksha. And then next two mantras, logical, so to say, framework for existence of God. See, we see very powerful natural elements like fire, sun, wind, this earth and all that relentlessly working, meticulously working without interfering into each other's work. Seeing this, seeing the meticulous functioning of this world, automatically we are perforce, we have to accept that there has to be a niyamaka, a controller for this entire creation. Just as we see an enterprise where very powerful beings are working relentlessly, meticulously, everything is running smooth, we say there must be someone who is more powerful than all of them, under whose administration, so to say, all these are working. So also these natural forces, which themselves are very powerful, seeing them working in unison, relentlessly, without break, naturally that's a logic. That's an inference, so to say. So there has to be a being who is more powerful than all of them and who is controlling them, who is guiding them. And that being is nothing but God. So bhayadasya agnistapati bhayat tapati surya, like that. That, so to say, an inference is presented to establish the moola of this creation. The very fact that it runs smoothly, it must have its pratishtha, its substratum, some cause of its maintenance, and that is God. And that moola was said to be in this context, Mahad Bhayam Vajramudyatam, great fear, like a raised thunderbolt. That we have to understand it is said so in this context because it is controlling very powerful elements. So, as the controller of very powerful elements, it is presented as a great fear, Mahad Bhayam, like that. But Shruti is not trying to scare us away that God is fearful. That's not the intention of the Shruti. In this context, it is controlling all the powerful forces. So it must be a great fear like that. Anyway, so these were the first three mantras. The next two mantras, Shruti encourages us to try to realize this moola of this creation, the God or self, Brahman, whatever you call it. Shruti is like our mother and interested in our highest good. So she is exhorting us, somehow or other, strive and realize your own self, which is nothing but the moola of this entire creation. This moola that we are talking of is not somewhere in the skies, it is in our own heart. It is our own self, everyone's self. That is the moola of this entire creation. So Shruti is telling somehow or other in this life, you realize that and destroy your involvement in this samsara. So Shruti says, Yo chet ashakat bodhum prak sharirasya visrasaha tatah sargeshu lokeshu sharirattvaya kalpate. Two scenarios, so to say, Shruti presents. Yaha, when here itself, sharirasya visrasaha prak, before the falling of the body. Bodhum ashakat, if you can realize it. If one can realize one's own self, Brahman, God, here itself, before the falling of this body, then there is no more samsara. We have managed to put an end to our involvement in this cycle of samsara. But if we fail to do that, tata, then on account of that non-realization of the self, sargeshu lokeshu sharirattvaya kalpate. One has to take different bodies. One has to take bodies in different lokas. In our scriptures, there are different lokas talked of. So one has to take bodies in different lokas. Prithvi loka, Pitru loka, like that, so many lokas are there. These lokas are the places where we exhaust our karma phala, the results of our actions. So sargeshu lokoshe, in all these lokas, one becomes fit, sharirattvaya kalpate, to assume a body. One has to assume a body. One has to take up a body in these different lokas. If one fails to realize God, to realize one's own self in this very life before the fall of the body. That is the first mantra. Two mantras are together, somewhat related. One may think that I will go to Swargaloka and there I will realize God. What is the hurry? I will go to Swargaloka, enjoy all the enjoyments and then realize God in Swargaloka. So that Shruti says, Yatha darshe tathatmani yatha swapne tatha pitraloke yatha apsu pariva dudrishe tatha gandharva loke chaya tapayoriva brahmaloke. This is an interesting and strange mantra. He says what kind of realization, perception of the self is possible in different lokas. Shruti is telling what is the kind of God realization, perception of God is possible in different lokas. So it says, Yatha adarshe tatha atmani. In this human body, in the human heart, perception of the self is like a reflection in a clean and steady mirror. In a clean and steady mirror, we have very distinct reflection. Such is the perception of the self in the human body. Self can be perceived in human body most distinctly. And then the last, Chaya Tapayoryo Brahmaloke. In Brahmaloka also, it will be very distinct, the self and the non-self. The distinction will be like Chaya and Tapa, like shade and or darkness and light. Just as darkness and light never stay together, they are distinct. So also the distinction between the self and non-self is very clear in Brahmaloka. So this Manushya Loka and Brahmaloka, you have very distinct perception and vision of the self. And then there are so many lokas in between. Between this Manushya Loka and Brahmaloka, there are so many lokas. Shruti here gives only two, but by reference we have to understand all the lokas between this Manushya Loka and Brahmaloka. And these two lokas are one is Pitruloka. How is the perception of the self in Pitruloka? It says, Yatha swapne tatha Pitruloke. Just as we see objects in a dream, such is the vision of the self in Pitruloka. Objects of the dream are very vague, disconnected, and before we get up, they are forgotten. Basically, we'll have a very vague perception of the self in Pitruloka. What about Gandharvaloka? Gandharvaloka is where they have this music and dancing and all kind of arts. There, what kind of vision of the self is available? It says Apsupariva. Apsu means water, in water. You stand at the bank of the lake and see the reflection. The water is moving. It is very indistinct. The head and shoulder get mixed up. So indistinct perception in Gandharvaloka. And so it is in all the lokas. All the lokas between this Manushaloka and Brahmaloka, perception of the self is very vague, indistinct. Now, 2-3 points in this regard. One is that in this matter only Shruti is the only pramana. There is no way we can corroborate what kind of vision of the self one has in all these lokas, including Brahmaloka. There is no way we can corroborate. So far as vision of the self in Manushya Loka is concerned, yes, we can corroborate it with the experience of the Jivan Muktans. But after Manushya Loka, Shruti is the only pramana, we cannot corroborate it. That's one thing. Secondly, having a vague vision of the self or indistinct vision of the self, what does it mean? Probably it means there is no inclination towards realizing God or realizing self in those lokas, except Brahmaloka and Manushya-loka. Because all these Swargaloka, Pitruloka is Swargaloka, or Gandharvaloka, or Yaksha, whatever, whichever loka one goes, these lokas are bhoga bhumis. One performs a lot of punyam with a desire to enjoy in this Manushya loka, and as a result one goes to these lokas, higher lokas. So there enjoyment is predominant. The mind is preoccupied with enjoyment. There would hardly be any inclination towards realizing God, realization of the self. Perhaps that's what is meant by having vague perception of the self in all those lokas. Because the mind is completely preoccupied with enjoyment. It is kalushita. It is, so to say, it is not pure mind. It is impure by so many desires. So there won't perhaps be any inclination towards realizing the self, and that's why Shruti says you will have vague and indistinct realization in all those lokas. So our best bet is either this human loka or this Brahmaloka. Now Shruti says Brahmaloka is dushprapa. Bhashyakara says Brahmaloka is dushprapa. Dushprapa means extremely difficult to attain. You have to perform so many special rites like Ashwamedha and all that, and special meditations to get to Brahmaloka. It is extremely difficult. So what is left is only this human life. Whatever effort we have to put in this very life. That is the purport of telling this. Shruti is telling about all these lokas and all that. Only purport is this. You have got this human life. It is precious. Make all efforts to realize your own self. That is the purport of Shruti quoting all these lokas. It doesn't have any other purport. Only to tell us that human life, here is the greatest opportunity to realize your own self. Make all efforts, realize self, and put an end to this involvement in samsara. So this goes very well with Sri Ramakrishna's teaching. Sri Ramakrishna repeatedly tells to realize God is the goal of human life. There is no other goal than to realize God. And in Gospel we find Sri Ramakrishna, we talked about all these lokas. And of course, the purport of the Shruti is not to encourage us to go to these lokas, but to discourage all those lokas, discourage going to all those lokas, and encourage us to strive for God realization here only. Sri Ramakrishna also, he believed in post-mortem life, life after death and all that. But he did not encourage that kind of discussion. If we read in the gospel, this discussion about Janmantara and after death and all that, he never used to encourage it. He used to say, you don't bother about all that, what happens after death. This human life, in this human life, you strive to attain devotion to God. That is the focus. He used to kind of tell us to focus on present. Don't bother about future. It's not that he did not believe in afterlife and all that. But his intention was to tell us or to bring our attention back and focus it on this life. Very practical approach basically. What is available now, you focus on that. Make utmost use of this human life. Somehow attain devotion to God. That's what Sri Ramakrishna used to say. Don't bother about all that. He used to say, you have come to eat mangoes, eat mangoes. Don't bother about about branches and leaves and number of trees. Don't bother about all that. So focus on what you have. In our scriptures, we have so many references which glorify the human birth. Manushyatvam, mumukshutvam, mahapurusha samshraya. This having a human body, having desire for liberation. We all have that. And then this Mahapurusha Samshraya, that is the shelter of great souls. We have been sheltered by Sri Ramakrishna and Mother, Swamiji, everyone. All these. So everything is favorable to us. Now it all depends on us. Our effort, how much effort we can put. It all depends on that. Sri Ramakrishna says, Guru, Krishna, Vaishnava, all three have blessed you. Guru has blessed, God has blessed, Vaishnava has blessed, great men and women have blessed you. Now, need the grace of your own mind. We need the grace of our own mind to strive and put our best in this endeavor to realize God, to attain devotion in this very life. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, unless there is yearning, intense yearning, God realization is not possible. See, one cannot get intense yearning just by asking or just by thinking about it. It needs so much of sadhana. One cannot perform so much of sadhana also in between, at the start. Just as we imagine or we want to do it and immediately we start doing intense sadhana, that is also not possible. We cannot have intense yearning just by wishing it. So, antarikata, sincerity, then introspection and prayers. These are our only available means as of now. That sincerity, like sincerely doing whatever is possible in our hands. Seeking God sincerely doing whatever is possible in our control, in our capacity. That sincerity should be there. Second is introspection. That is, we have to introspect ourselves. We have loopholes. What are the loopholes of our own life? We have to introspect. And then we have to pray to God to give us right direction and strength to plug those loopholes and move Godward. So this sincerity, introspection and prayer. This is what we can do. We cannot generate vyakulata, we cannot generate intense yearning. But with sincerity, we can put forth our efforts to introspection, that is most important. Conduct introspection of our own character, our own life, and find out where we are wasting our energies, and then pray to God to give us right direction, solutions, and strength to plug those loopholes and move Godward. With this, if we put efforts, then definitely by grace of God, there is chance that we may realize God in this very life by God's grace. So Sri Ramakrishna, he repeatedly tells, God realization is the goal of human life. Same thing Shruti is also telling. If you don't realize in this life, in another Upanishad it comes, Nachet iha vedid mahati vinashti. Great loss it is if you don't realize in this very life. So that great loss will be there if we don't realize. It's our own loss. But it's so. But that's why Sri Ramakrishna encourages us. Shruti also encourages us to put forth all efforts and to realize God in this very life. All right. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.